The final hour of Christmas Eve settled over the Blackwood Tower like a heavy winter curtain. Floors that normally pulsed with conversations and the rhythm of constant ambition had fallen silent, leaving only the distant hum of the elevators and the faint glow of holiday lights reflecting off glass walls. In the far corner of the 17th floor, Lena Hartman worked alone at her desk, her shoulders tight with the familiar mixture of determination and loneliness that always surfaced this time of year. Everyone else had gone home to families, warm dinners, and laughter. She stayed behind because work was honest, predictable, and far easier to understand than people. She rubbed the ache in her wrist and clicked through the last of the quarterly reports when she heard slow footsteps approaching. They were measured, confident, unmistakably belonging to the one person who almost never appeared without warning. She straightened instinctively as Adrian Blackwood stepped into the halo of her desk lamp, immaculate in a charcoal coat, his expression carved from something cold and old. Lena blinked, unsure why the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire would be standing here, of all places, on the quietest night of the year. Adrian studied her as if confirming a decision he had been wrestling with for hours. He spoke softly, his voice low enough that the stillness of the office seemed to absorb every syllable. "I need your help tonight." Lena frowned, confused. She was an executive assistant, not a crisis negotiator. Still, she nodded for him to continue, her heartbeat quickening, though she could not explain why. He drew a quiet breath. "I need you to come home with me, not as my employee, as my wife." The words landed between them with the weight of a falling tree. For a moment, Lena could only stare, the meaning refusing to assemble into anything reasonable. Adrian held her gaze, his eyes dark with something more desperate than he wanted her to see. "My family expects me to bring my wife home for the holiday gathering. They do not take no for an answer. They never have." Lena pushed back from her chair, stunned by the sheer insanity of what he was asking. She barely spoke to him outside of work. She definitely was not going to pretend to be married to him. Not for a family she had never met, not for a man who carried his emotions like locked files behind glass. Adrian seemed to read the refusal forming on her lips. There was a flicker of something like fear in his eyes, quickly masked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you walk away, I will understand, but before you decide, you should know one thing. I am prepared to compensate you." He named the amount as if it were a simple fact. $200,000. The exact sum Lena needed to save Aunt Rosalind's home from foreclosure. Her breath hitched. He had no way of knowing, and yet the number struck like an arrow shot straight through her defenses. Outside the windows, snow began to fall over the city. Inside the quiet office, Lena Hartman realized her life was about to split in two directions. One ordinary, one unthinkable. Adrian waited, unmoving, as if the entire winter night depended on her answer. The elevator ride to Adrian's private floor felt unreal, a slow ascent into a world Lena had only glimpsed from a distance. Her heartbeat thudded behind her ribs as the doors slid open to reveal a minimalist hallway washed in warm light. She followed him silently, every step echoing with the question she had not yet dared to ask. Why her? Why tonight? Why this? Adrian unlocked a glass office beyond the executive suites, a space she had never entered. The room was quiet except for the soft whisper of a hidden ventilation system. A single folder sat on the polished black table, placed with the precision of someone who never did anything by accident. Lena hovered near the doorway, uncertain whether to sit or run. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please." His tone was gentle, but the shadows in his eyes warned her that this was more than an awkward request. It carried the weight of a man cornered by expectations he could not escape. Lena slowly took her seat, her fingers curling around the fabric of her coat. Adrian opened the folder. Inside was a printed contract, the pages crisp and immaculate. He turned it toward her so she could read. Each line was written with clarity, the kind of clarity that stripped away illusion. It was a legal agreement for 4 days of a fabricated marriage, public appearances, shared presence, a believable portrayal of affection. And beneath all of that, 2 clauses written in firmer language than the rest. First, Neither party may develop real emotional attachment lasting beyond the contracted duration. Second, should such attachment arise, it must be disclosed immediately, resulting in automatic termination of the agreement. Lena's breath caught. The words looked clinical but felt like a razor pressed lightly against the skin. She lifted her gaze to him, waiting for an explanation that might make this make sense. Adrian exhaled slowly, as though surrendering something he had held inside for far too long. The last woman I brought home was turned into a bargaining chip. My family leveraged our relationship for influence, decisions, alliances. They broke us before we could choose each other. I will not let that happen again. Lena did not miss the faint tremor in his jaw, the lingering fracture behind his composed facade. He was terrified of history repeating itself, terrified of hurting someone else, terrified of needing anyone at all. "So you created rules to make sure no one could get close," she said softly. "To make sure no one could be harmed because of me," he corrected. The money still sat between them like a silent judge. $200,000, a miracle disguised as madness. Enough to save Aunt Rosalind's home, enough to end years of instability, enough to change everything. Adrian closed the folder. "There is one more thing. After the holiday, you will transfer to the Chicago branch. Clean break, no lingering proximity, no blurred lines." It was meant to protect them both. It felt like a sentence. Lena looked at the contract again. The ink was dry. The terms were final. Her hand hovered above the pen, trembling between fear and necessity. Outside the window, the city glittered beneath falling snow. Inside the quiet room, her decision waited, sharp and irrevocable. She picked up the pen. Adrian guided Lena into the private lounge adjoining his office, a room designed for quiet negotiation and high-level secrecy. Soft amber lights glowed against the dark wood panels, casting warmth that failed to ease the tension coiling in her chest. On a small table near the window rested a velvet box, its deep navy surface almost too elegant to touch. Adrian picked it up without hesitation, as though this moment had already been rehearsed in his mind long before he ever approached her. He opened the box to reveal a ring that looked anything but temporary. A polished band set with a single brilliant diamond that caught the city lights and scattered them endlessly. Lena stared, stunned by the sincerity of it. She expected something simple, something apologetically fake. This was not that. This looked real enough to change a life. Adrian stepped closer. "Hold out your hand." She hesitated, her breath catching as she extended her fingers. His touch was unexpectedly warm, steady. When he slid the ring onto her hand, Lena felt a subtle shift deep inside her, a tiny crack in the armor she prided herself on. The metal settled against her skin as if it belonged there, and she had to remind herself this was not a proposal. This was part of an arrangement, a performance, nothing more. "Now we craft the story," he said, releasing her hand gently. They sat across from each other on the sofa as he laid out the details with precise clarity. They had met 3 months earlier at a second-hand bookshop in Midtown. She had been searching for a rare edition of a collection of poetry. He had shown up looking for a biography. They reached for the same dusty copy on the top shelf, their hands brushing by accident. A quiet laugh, a shared conversation, a coffee date. A connection that grew in quiet places, away from prying eyes. A private courthouse wedding 1 month ago, kept secret because his family had a way of turning personal milestones into business leverage. It was a simple narrative, but textured enough to withstand scrutiny. Lena found herself filling in small details without meaning to. The smell of old pages, the sound of rain tapping on the bookstore windows, the way she might have tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while pretending not to stare at him. The kind of moments a real couple would remember without thinking. Adrian watched her closely, his gaze deepening with each fragment she added, as if he were discovering something about her he had never expected to see. "We will arrive together tomorrow morning," he said. "They will expect us to act married. They will test us. My family can be relentless." Lena nodded, the weight of what she had agreed to sinking in deeper now that the framework of their lie was fully constructed. She wondered how long she could maintain a facade in a home full of strangers who treated affection as a political tool. "One more thing," he added quietly. "There is a photograph you should know about." He turned his phone toward her. A picture of a woman smiling, dark hair curled against her shoulders. His former bride-to-be. A reminder of a promise broken by power and manipulation. Lena looked at him, seeing the bruise that past still left in his eyes. "I am not asking you to replace her," he said, "only to stand beside me until this is over." The ring on her finger gleamed under the warm light. Their fabricated story hovered between them, fragile and untested. And as snow thickened outside the window, Lena realized she was no longer preparing for a performance. She was preparing to enter a world where truth and pretense were about to collide. The drive to Blackwood Manor carried Lena far from the glittering skyline of the city into the quiet, snow-softened edges of the countryside. The further they went, the more the world seemed to hold its breath. A long, wrought-iron gate marked the entrance to the estate, its sharp curves forming the unmistakable crest of the Blackwood family. As the gate opened and the car rolled forward, Lena felt the weight of expectation settle across her shoulders like a second winter coat. The manor rose from the hill in a sweep of pale stone and shadow, its tall windows glowing with a cold amber light. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress polished for display. Adrian stepped out first, his face tightening into the controlled expression she had seen in high-level meetings. She followed, her boots crunching against the snow-covered pathway. The air smelled faintly of pine and something older, maybe the echo of history itself. The carved double doors opened before they reached them. Victoria Blackwood stood framed in the entrance, elegant in deep emerald velvet. Her posture was perfect, her eyes sharp and assessing. She took in Lena with a single glance, the kind of glance that measured worth, background, and intentions all at once. Charles Blackwood approached beside her, tall and stern, a man whose silence felt louder than any spoken greeting. Welcome was not the word Victoria chose. "So, this is your wife," she said, each syllable feathered with skepticism. Lena forced a polite smile, offering her hand, and Victoria accepted it only because etiquette demanded she must. Her fingers were cool and deliberate, as if she were testing the authenticity of the woman her son had brought home. Inside, the manor unfolded into a grand hall, washed in the warm glow of candlelight reflecting off marble floors. Portraits of Blackwood ancestors lined the walls, their solemn eyes following Lena as if recording her presence for future judgment. She wondered whether these people ever smiled, or if this home had always carried the chill of restrained emotion. Sabrina appeared next, younger than she expected, striking and sharp-eyed. She walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to having her observations taken seriously. "You married quickly," she noted, her voice like a bell crafted from silver and frost. "How romantic!" Gregory stood beside her, arms crossed loosely, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His gaze moved from Adrian to Lena, lingering just long enough to unsettle. "So this is the woman who convinced our brother to elope," he said. "Impressive." Adrian stepped slightly closer to Lena, his presence a quiet anchor. "We wanted something simple and private," he replied calmly, "away from the pressure of expectations." Charles's gaze flicked over their hands, searching for any sign of hesitation or mismatch. Lena lifted her chin, ensuring the ring caught the light exactly as a cherished wedding band should. She felt Adrian's fingers brush hers, a subtle reassurance hidden from everyone but her. Dinner was announced by a household assistant whose voice seemed trained to echo through stone. As they walked toward the dining room, Lena sensed the manor itself adjusting to her presence, as though every painting and polished surface were preparing to judge whether she belonged. Adrian's family did not speak of affection or welcome. They spoke of lineage, strategy, alliances. To them, love was an accessory at best and a liability at worst. When they reached the long dining table set with crystal and silver, Lena felt the test begin in earnest. She took her seat beside Adrian, aware that each movement, each glance, each breath would be measured not against sincerity but against expectation. And as the first course was served, she realized the Blackwoods were not merely a family. They were an institution, and she had just stepped into its highest court. The dining room stretched the length of the manor's east wing, its high-arched windows revealing the soft fall of snow beyond the glass. A chandelier glittered overhead, its crystals reflecting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chill emanating from the Blackwood family. Lena sat beside Adrian, her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, doing everything she could to appear calm. In truth, her pulse drummed with a frantic rhythm. Every eye at the table seemed to weigh her presence, measure her worth, probe for flaws. Victoria lifted her wineglass with poised precision. "To unexpected unions," she said, her tone smooth yet edged like a blade wrapped in silk. Sabrina let out a light laugh, a sound that carried more mischief than mirth. "Unexpected is one word for it," she murmured, swirling her glass. Lena offered a polite smile, though her throat felt tight. She glanced at Adrian, who met her eyes with a steadying look, a silent promise that she was not facing this alone. Yet it did little to soothe the awareness of how precarious their position was. This was not a family dinner. It was a trial disguised as hospitality. The first course arrived, delicate plates placed before them with practiced grace. The conversation circled around business, philanthropy, and the future of the Blackwood Empire. Lena noted how effortlessly each family member wielded their words like instruments of influence. No one asked how she and Adrian were adjusting to married life. No one asked about her family, her interests, or even her comfort. They wanted information, not connection. Then Sabrina struck. "So, Lena," she began, her voice bright, her eyes glinting with deliberate curiosity. "You and Adrian must have such a charming story. Tell us again. How did you two meet?" The air shifted. Charles's gaze sharpened. Victoria lifted an eyebrow. Gregory leaned back in his chair, smirking as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Lena felt the ground beneath her metaphorical feet tremble. They had rehearsed, but not thoroughly enough. The question came sooner, more directly than she expected, and Sabrina knew it. Lena inhaled, preparing to answer, but her mind blanked under the weight of scrutiny. The details slipped from her grasp like sand through trembling fingers. The room seemed to narrow, voices dimming, the pressure collapsing inward. Sabrina tilted her head, hungry for the slightest hesitation. Adrian's hand found hers beneath the table. "We met at Langley's Books," he said smoothly, his tone warm enough to sound genuine, yet confident enough to deflect suspicion. "She was reaching for an anthology of modern poetry that I had noticed earlier. I decided to wait and see who else in Manhattan had such impeccable taste." Sabrina blinked, thrown off by the unexpected charm in his voice. Lena felt her lungs open again, breath finally returning. Adrian continued, his thumb brushing the back of her hand in a steady rhythm meant only for her. "It started raining. The shop owner locked up early. We ended up sharing the one umbrella I had brought. The rest unfolded naturally." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "How cinematic of you." Charles studied the two of them closely, his silence carrying the weight of judgment. Yet something in the way Adrian leaned toward Lena, something subtle and unpracticed, softened the scrutiny. "When we know, Adrian added simply, and the conviction in his tone was so gentle, so quietly certain, that even Victoria hesitated. Lena felt the shift in the room, a slight one, but real. The first test had come, and together they had survived it. For the first time, Lena sensed the faintest crack in the icy wall surrounding the Blackwood family. And beside her, Adrian released her hand only when the danger had passed, his fingers lingering half a second longer than necessary. Long enough to mean something she could not yet name. The master guest suite felt impossibly large, its vaulted ceiling casting long shadows that flickered with the soft glow of the fireplace. Lena stood near the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds of the Blackwood estate. The snow reflected the pale light in shimmering waves, but it brought her no sense of calm. The tension from dinner still clung to her like a cold film on her skin. Behind her, Adrian closed the door with a muted click. The fragile alliance they had shown downstairs dissolved into an uneasy silence. He crossed the room, shrugging off his jacket, his posture stiff and guarded. For a man so composed in daylight, he now seemed unmoored, as if every moment of proximity sharpened the precarious balance between them. "I will take the sofa," he said quietly, already pulling a folded blanket from the linen chest. His tone held no warmth, no trace of the gentle solidarity he had shown at the dinner table. It was as if he had retreated again behind the steel gates of his own rules. Lena nodded, though a discomfort twisted through her. The room felt charged, heavy with unsaid things. She crossed into the marble bathroom to change, her hands trembling as she buttoned her soft cotton sleep shirt. She had expected awkwardness, but not this sense of distance that bordered on loneliness. When she stepped back into the room, Adrian was already lying on the long velvet sofa, his back turned to her, one arm draped over his eyes. Lena slipped into the massive bed, its luxurious sheets cool against her skin. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. The silence between them grew deeper, louder, a gulf neither dared cross. Hours passed like slow-moving shadows. Lena drifted into a fragile sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sound. Not loud, but raw, urgent. A choked gasp. A strained plea. "No, please." She pushed herself up, her heart thudding. Adrian was no longer still. His body twisted in the blankets, his breath harsh and uneven. Moonlight sliced across his face, revealing the strain carved into every line. Pain, fear, vulnerability so stark it stole her breath. "Adrian," she whispered, sliding out of bed, stepping toward him on bare feet. The cold floor bit into her skin, but she barely felt it. She kneeled beside the sofa, her hand hovering above his shoulder. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if touching him would break something fragile between them. Then he muttered again, voice cracking under the weight of the dream. "Don't go." The plea was so broken it pierced her. She gently touched his shoulder. "Adrian, wake up. It's just a dream. You're safe." His eyes flew open, wild, unfocused. For a terrifying heartbeat, he didn't recognize her. His breath came in sharp, ragged pulls. She kept her hand on his arm, grounding him, offering an anchor. "It's me, Adrian. You're okay." Slowly, his breathing steadied. The tension drained from his frame, replaced by something fragile and exposed. The walls he always held in perfect place had crumbled. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding hers with a rawness she had never seen in him. Not the CEO, not the controlled heir of the Blackwood dynasty, just a man haunted by a past he would not name. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low, shaken. Lena stayed there beside the sofa, her hand resting gently on his arm. Two strangers bound by a contract. Yet in that moment, something deeper, unspoken, wove between them. A thread neither of them knew how to break. Christmas morning at the Blackwood estate unfolded like a ceremony rather than a celebration. The drawing room, vast and meticulously arranged, felt more like the setting of a diplomatic event than a family holiday. Heavy garlands framed the tall windows, their greenery immaculate, their lights cool and precise. A massive tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments that looked more like museum pieces than anything meant to spark joy. Lena entered beside Adrian, her ankle still tender but manageable. The family had already gathered. Theodore Blackwood sat in an armchair by the fireplace, his posture a study in rigid authority. Across from him stood Isabel, elegantly dressed and orchestrating the room with subtle gestures, as though even the air obeyed her. Miles lingered near the bar cart, swirling a glass of brandy, though it was barely past 9. Serena lounged by the window, the picture of bored aristocracy. A uniformed staff member moved from person to person, presenting gifts wrapped in crisp, metallic paper. The exchange was formal, devoid of warmth, a ritual performed for tradition's sake rather than affection. When the staff member approached Lena, she felt heat creep up her neck. She had no gift for Adrian. The contract had occupied every corner of her mind, leaving no room for considerations like presence. She opened her mouth to whisper an apology, but Adrian beat her to it. "I didn't get you anything either," he murmured, his tone smooth and steady. "Our presence will be the present. Newlyweds tradition." The words were offered lightly, but when he glanced at her, the small smile he gave her held real reassurance. It was quiet, private, meant for her alone. Something warm fluttered in her chest, a welcome contrast to the icy atmosphere around them. After the last gift was distributed, the family dispersed, some drifting to other rooms, others settling into whispered conversations. Lena slipped away, seeking refuge in the one space she had found comforting the day before, the library. The air inside was rich with the scent of aged leather and wood polish. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching in the motes of dust that danced lazily in the warm glow. She ran her fingers along the spines of books as she walked, feeling herself slowly uncoil. She stopped at a shelf of worn editions, her gaze tracing the gold lettering of a familiar title, The Secret Garden. A soft exhale left her lips. Childhood memories fluttered through her mind, brief but vivid. She didn't notice Adrian until he spoke her name. "Lena." She turned. He stood in the doorway, holding something behind his back. His eyes were unreadable, but his posture was tense, as though he'd practiced his next words and still wasn't sure they were right. "I lied earlier," he said softly as he approached. She blinked, confused, until he brought his hands forward. In them was a small, clumsily wrapped package. The paper was slightly torn on one corner, the tape uneven. It looked nothing like the pristine gifts handed out minutes earlier. He offered it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a hardcover book, its navy cloth spine faded with time. A first edition of The Secret Garden. The very book she'd mentioned weeks ago in a passing conversation neither of them had acknowledged since. Her breath caught. "How did you even remember?" "Because I listen when you speak," he replied, the honesty in his voice catching her off guard. Her eyes burned. She swallowed hard, searching for something she could give in return, something equally real. "Wait here," she said, and hurried back to the suite. She returned with the charcoal sketch she had drawn of the snow-covered oak. She handed it to him silently. He took it gently, studying the lines with a reverence that made her chest tighten. When he looked up, there was nothing guarded in his expression, only a quiet, raw sincerity. "Thank you, Lena." The fragile foundation of something real had formed between them, and it was already threatening the rules meant to keep them apart. The annual Blackwood Christmas Gala transformed the manor into a glittering spectacle of polished wealth and curated charm. By evening, the ballroom throbbed with muted strings from a live quartet, the soft rustle of silk dresses, and the low murmur of conversations among the city's most powerful families. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering patterns across the marble floor, making the room feel like an opulent snow globe suspended in time. Lena, her ankle wrapped neatly beneath the hem of her gown, had been positioned in a velvet alcove near the western wall. Adrian had chosen the spot carefully, a place where she would not need to stand for long periods, yet still appear present and involved. He hovered near her often, introducing her to hand-picked guests, shielding her from others with a subtle shift of his body or a polite but firm tone. To the casual observer, he was the image of a devoted husband. But for Lena, the warmth in his glances felt dangerously genuine. Every time his hand brushed her shoulder or lingered briefly at her waist to steady her, the unspoken electricity between them sparked yet again, gathering strength by the hour. They shared a low laugh over a senator's disastrous dancing when the ambush arrived. Serena appeared out of the crowd like a shadow, clutching a sprig of greenery with theatrical delicacy, a sprig heavy with white berries, mistletoe. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Look at that," she said sweetly, raising the sprig directly above their heads. "Tradition is tradition." The surrounding guests turned like sharks, sensing blood. Conversations dimmed. Fans paused mid-flutter. Even the quartet's melody seemed to falter. All eyes were on them, the newlyweds, the perfect spectacle. Lena felt her heart thud painfully. Adrian had gone still beside her, every line of his body taut. She could feel him thinking, calculating, searching for a way to keep their cover intact without breaking the one rule he had sworn to protect. He looked at her. For a brief moment, the room faded. It was just the two of them, suspended in a silent exchange. "What do we do?" Lena inhaled, feeling the weight of the moment. She could pretend to laugh it off, turn away, dismiss the tradition. But as she looked at him, at the man who had carried her through the snow, who remembered her favorite book, who woke from nightmares with a plea that broke her heart, she knew she didn't want to evade the moment. She gave him the smallest nod. Permission. Trust. Adrian's eyes softened. He turned fully to her, dismissing the audience with a glacial flicker of indifference. He lifted a hand to her cheek, fingertips tracing her skin with a tenderness that stole her breath. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. The first brush of his lips was gentle, composed, for the sake of the watching crowd. But the instant they touched, the boundary between performance and truth shattered. The kiss deepened not with heat, but with profound emotion, the weight of every unspoken feeling pulling them closer. It was a confession in the guise of ceremony. The ballroom disappeared. The spectators ceased to exist. Only the warmth of his mouth, the steady strength of his hand, and the shocking certainty blooming in her chest remained. When they parted, they were both trembling. His forehead rested briefly against hers, breath unsteady. The roar of applause and murmured delight swelled around them, but felt impossibly distant. They had crossed the line, not just broken the rule, destroyed it, and everyone in the room had witnessed the moment they fell. Adrian led Lena out of the ballroom with a grip that was firm but trembling, a silent thread pulling them through a maze of dim corridors until they reached the quiet sanctuary of the library. He closed the heavy doors behind them, shutting out the echo of applause and the expectant murmurs of guests who believed they had witnessed a romantic triumph instead of a catastrophic mistake. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows that wavered with every shift of their breathing. For a moment, neither spoke. Adrian stood at the mantel, his shoulders rigid, his hands braced against the marble as if he were holding up the entire weight of the world. Lena stayed near the door, her lungs struggling to find air that wasn't thick with dread. "That should not have happened," he said at last. His voice was low, hoarse, stripped of its usual control. It carried the rawness of a confession rather than a reprimand. Lena closed her eyes briefly, the ghost of the kiss still warm on her lips. "We broke the rule," she whispered. Saying it out loud made the truth feel heavier, sharper, like glass pressing into her skin. The contract, the clause, the promise to confess if any real feelings emerged. That confession would end everything. The arrangement, their proximity, their fragile connection. Adrian turned slowly to face her. The anguish in his eyes hollowed her out. The mask he wore for the world was gone, leaving a man torn open by his own design. "I wrote that rule to protect myself," he said quietly. "I never expected it to become the very thing that would destroy us." Us. The word struck her like a blow. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't an accident. It was the truth he was trying not to claim. She took a step closer, though her hands trembled. "The contract is clear, Adrian. We end this now. You transfer me to Seattle. We go our separate ways. That's what we agreed." He flinched as if she had struck him. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated, her breath hitched. Her heart screamed no, but her mind, trained by years of survival and pragmatic choices, forced her to steady herself. "It's what the rules dictate," she said softly, her voice cracked. "It's what you dictated." Silence stretched between them, thick and excruciating. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally. The words fell from him like a broken prayer. His composure fractured, leaving him raw and desperate. Lena's heart twisted painfully. "I don't want to lose you either," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Their honesty, instead of freeing them, only deepened the chasm between them. They were bound by a rule that had already shattered, a rule that now demanded their separation as punishment for the very connection it feared. Adrian took a step toward her, then another. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, sense the conflict warring in him. "We have one more day," he murmured. "Tomorrow is Boxing Day. The agreement ends the morning after." He swallowed hard. "Let's pretend for one more day, not for them, for us." The plea broke something open inside her. One more day, one more impossibly precious, unbearably painful day. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. One more day. In that quiet room filled with the echoes of a forbidden kiss and the remnant, it was in the way Adrian instinctively pulled out a chair for Lena, in how her hand brushed his arm with a natural ease when she reached for a cup, in the small, soft look they exchanged. Adrian watched her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "I used to hide in here when I was young, when the expectations became too heavy." Pain shot through her injured ankle, and she gasped. Before she could fall, Adrian caught her, arms tightening around her waist with a speed that startled them both. They stood watching Adrian stood by